So whenever we build an F-16, we're doing it with the permission of China. This can't last. We're not thinking things through. We're creating chaos everywhere because assets are continuing to move into the region. Now, I know that Trump doesn't want to do that. I know the man, and that's not something he wants to do, but Mr. Netanyahu does. So I think we're headed into another conflict. But striking Iran has a lot of implications. Most of them are bad. Now, the Turks, whatever their difference is with Iran, have decided it's not in their interest for Iran to be destroyed. And the Iranians have made it clear that if they're hit hard, they will close the Straits of Hormuz as a defensive measure. If that were to happen, China is not going to sit quietly and allow us to essentially starve them of oil. I worry about the automatic tripwire. You were talking earlier. What do you think will trigger this with Iran? And I also fear that nuclear weapons, despite our best efforts to suppress those and keep them under control, are likely to proliferate.
Welcome back. A quick thank you before we start. Our John Kiriakou interview crossed well into the 6-digit views, and I appreciate every share and watch. So to the matter at hand today, tonight's guest needs no introduction. It's Colonel Douglas Macgregor, decorated combat veteran, former senior advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Defense, one of the sharpest strategic minds on military and foreign policy in the U.S., and a rare voice willing to call out America's institutional blind spots. We're going to go straight into the headlines, Iran and the escalation risks behind the scenes, the U.S. First Amendment's free speech issue at home, the Greenland standoff, and a potential U.S.-EU economic rupture, as well as a U.S.-NATO one, Trump's Gaza Board of Peace plan at Davos, and if we have time, briefly, Venezuela's shifting power game. And just like we do every time, we'll dive into angles the Western media won't. So let's get into it. Colonel, very warm welcome back from me.
Thanks very much.
Sir, let's start off with Iran. As we know, the protests have died down. It also seemed that the Iran unrest, including an attempt to crash Iran's currency, was a coordinated Mossad CIA destabilization operation using pre-positioned Starlink and covert support, which was catastrophically compromised when Iran, aided by Russian electronic warfare, disabled Starlink. So, Colonel, do you think the Mossad's critical on-the-ground network of assets, built over decades, it seems, has been effectively identified and dismantled this time, leaving it finished and unusable? The entire Mossad network in Iran that took decades to build, now gone?
Well, that's a sweeping statement that, I couldn't possibly tell you one way or the other. As you say, the Mossad invested many, many years in, infiltrating in Iran. So we call that in the West a fifth column. And I imagine that most of it has been disrupted, if not destroyed. And yes, you are right. It was not simply Mossad. I think the CIA and MI6 were also involved, unfortunately. I think that President Trump and the leadership in the White House had unrealistic expectations of what would happen in Iran. There's always a problem in every country with the people at the top who tend to wish something into existence. And when they can't wish it into existence, they try to make it work. But they end up in a fantasy world. And I think there were some fantastic expectations of the unrest in Iran. People, first of all, didn't understand what was happening to begin with. When the unrest began, these were legitimate protests. And you had a conflict between conservatives and reformers, people that wanted to see more change, more reform, more quickly. Conservatives who had resisted a lot of change but recognized, yes, there has to be change, but wanted to be slower and more measured. This then became an opportunity for the intelligence services and people that were being paid on the ground in Iran to really, really launch what they hoped would be a destabilizing force that could actually overturn the government. I think that was very obvious. They had the crown prince of Iran, this Pahlavi, standing by, who's effectively, repugnant to everybody in Iran because he's sold out to the Israelis and the United States. So he has no credibility or legitimacy. But they thought that they might be able to install him. And I think there was a belief that if you disrupted the government, if you could get people into the governmental apparatus as a result of the disturbances on the streets, that somehow or another a little bit of bombing here or there might be all that was needed and the entire structure would implode. Well, that was always nonsense. And it's unfortunate that people believed that. When it became clear that was not going to happen, I think people in Washington, particularly the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and others, said, well, Mr. President, it didn't happen, and we're going to need a lot more firepower if we have to fight Iran than what we have on station. So then you've gotten this pause. While more assets were moved in from the Navy, from the Air Force, more munitions, more logistical support, more infrastructure is ready. So the war isn't over, and the probability of another conflict, unfortunately, is very high because assets are continuing to move into the region. You know, you're getting another carrier battle group, you're getting more ships with anti-missile defense capability, more aircraft, more fighters. And, you know, I'm sure that there are more bombers ready to go than there were originally. In other words, it didn't work. The government was not destabilized. It did not implode. So now you fall back on the original idea, well, we have to bomb these people into submission. Now, I know that Trump doesn't want to do that. I know the man, and that's not something he wants to do, but Mr. Netanyahu does. And President Trump is in the unenviable position of having to comply with Mr. Netanyahu for reasons that have to do with his election to the White House. If he had not had substantial monetary financial support from Mr. Netanyahu's supporters inside the United States, he would not now be president. It's that simple. So I think we're headed into another conflict.
So, Colonel, that I was going to ask you, because there was this massive U.S. military surge underway with warplanes moving in and the carriers repositioning. So, but we haven't heard since on what's happened to those. I mean, what's actually happened to that buildup? I understand from your analysis now that it hasn't been called back, but have there just been like selective withdrawals and protective personnel reductions while the broader strike posture stays in place? That's what you're asserting, sir?
Yeah, for the moment, the strike structure, if you will, is going to stay where it is. As far as evacuations are concerned, I'm sure some people have been evacuated. I don't know how many. We know that our bases are very vulnerable. We can't protect them all. So this is a high-risk operation for us from that standpoint. But President Trump, is convinced that our firepower will be enough to deal with anything that Iran throws at us. I don't know. I mean, these things are hard to understand. Lots of assumptions are made before military operations begin. Most of the time, they're wrong. I hate to be frank, but it turns out that way. And as a result, I have a feeling we've made a number of assumptions that may be false or inaccurate. Most of those assumptions apply to Iran. I think we underestimate the buildup of their missile capability. I think they fully recovered from what happened in June of last year. I think they've had enormous technological support and assistance from the Russians and the Chinese. Now, you mentioned the Starlight terminals. There were about 40,000 that we had managed to sneak into the country, or I would say the Mossad and others. I'm sure those were all donated under duress by Mr. Elon Musk. We also know the Chinese intervened to jam the satellites. So we have the Chinese involved as well as the Russians in Iran. The question that should be on everybody's mind is that if you unleash this tremendous bombardment that is planned, what will the reaction be in Moscow and Beijing? Now, the Russians are disinclined to become involved. They would like Iran to defend itself, and they've done everything they can to help them. China's in a somewhat different position because the Chinese purchase 1/3 of their oil consumption from the Middle East, and it comes largely through the Straits of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. And the Iranians have made it clear that if they're hit hard, they will close the Straits of Hormuz as a defensive measure. If that were to happen, China is not going to sit quietly and allow us to essentially starve them of oil. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. But striking Iran has a lot of implications. Most of them are bad.
Yeah. Okay. And so you are not of the belief that the covert network that Israel had set up for decades there has been completely dismantled. You're clear about that. Okay.
I don't think.
All right.
Keep in mind, you also have the Kurds that are next door, the MEK, all these various organizations. Just little over a week ago, 400 Kurdish fighters tried to infiltrate into Iran. And the Turks alerted the Iranians to this. The Iranians were able to identify it and destroy them. So I think that's an interesting development that we should take very seriously, that now the Turks, whatever their differences with Iran, have decided it's not in their interest for Iran to be destroyed. No. We are interested, whether we admit it or not, in really destroying Iran. You know, our aim in Iran is very much the same as our aim was in Ukraine. You go into the war with the objective of dividing the country, splitting it up, taking its resources, rendering it essentially incapable of defending itself. Now, that hasn't worked with Iran, but that's why we've supported the Kurds, and the Israelis have supported the Kurds. And now that the Turks have the Israelis on their southern border down in Syria and see them advancing in Lebanon, I think the Turks have taken a different posture. And I think they're interested in seeing Iran survive. Now, how far will they go? Right now, with Mr. Erdogan in charge, I don't see the Turks becoming directly involved. If he were to suddenly vanish from the scene, that would change. Because it's very obvious that the attitude in Turkey towards Israel and Israeli behavior is extraordinarily negative. And we're not terribly popular either.
Extremely negative and hostile to them. You're right, sir. But let's not forget that there's also, if I'm not mistaken, there's elections in Israel later this year. So this selective drawdown, is it partly Trump on his part giving Netanyahu a face-saving facade, just keeping the Iran war card looking like it's still up, so Netanyahu isn't embarrassed domestically from also this negative outcome. It's his second attempt to overthrow the regime in Iran in a matter of less than a year, especially with the elections coming up this year.
Well, you can speculate about that for hours. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Netanyahu understands that he has an opportunity right now, between now and the fall, to realize, he thinks, his great aims. If he is going to establish Jewish supremacy in the Middle East, in other words, Israeli Jewish supremacy, militarily, politically, financially, he's got to do it over the next few months. Now, why is that? Well, you do have these elections coming up in the United States. You may end up with a Congress that, for the first time in a long time, is willing to move in and constrain the president. The president may confront real opposition, making it much more difficult for him to act as he likes, which is what he's doing right now. We don't know what the world will look like in another 6 months. We don't know if Mr. Trump's health will hold out. He is approaching 80. That's a very advanced age in a job that would kill most men who are in their 50s. So, we don't know a lot of things. And if you're Netanyahu, you ask, what is the incentive for me to sit on my rear end and do nothing? Not much incentive. I think the incentive for him is to act while he has things in his favor. And that means while Mr. Trump is there and can support him unconditionally without constraint from the Congress. And while we're financially solvent, because our financial position in the United States is weakening by the hour, I would say, at this point. And put it all together, if you're Netanyahu, the implication is you better act. So that's why I'm betting heavily that we will see another war break out. And how that ends up, I have no idea.
Okay. Colonel, a last one on Iran before we move forward. staying on that point, it's widely known that Netanyahu has been pushing the U.S. towards war with Iran for decades now. And he keeps returning to it. I mean, we've seen it happen twice in the last, 7 months. So even if the covert tools inside Iran have for now been exposed, my concern, I don't know if it's also your concern, isn't it a big concern that he's, as you just said, he's still going to try to force escalation, but maybe this time it's true, it's tripwire, because it's shown that now it's provoking internally, unrest and protest in Iran. It didn't go through, just like what they attempted the first time, which was to bomb them directly on the nuclear installations. It also fell through. So maybe this time he's going to attempt a tripwire, whether that's a targeted strike on U.S. forces somewhere or on U.S. interests somewhere. It's not something they haven't done before, Colonel. There's the historical precedents. Even the USS Liberty in 1967. There's other precedents in 1994. How worried should Americans be about a provocation that drags the U.S. in such a war with Iran?
Well, the sad truth of the matter is that what we Americans think doesn't matter very much. Now, what do I mean by that? Everybody throws this word democracy around. Well, we're really not a democracy. We're a republic. We voted for a president. We don't vote on whether or not to strike anybody. We don't even follow the Constitution, which says that technically you can't begin a war against anyone without first asking Congress for its support and permission. Nobody's done that since Franklin Roosevelt in 1941. So this time around, we haven't even gone to Congress to ask for permission because Congress has been in the pocket of the Israel lobby. And so their attitude is, well, if that's what the Israelis want, we're supporting them. We'll let them have it. I don't see that will change, even though the public mood, the public attitude in much of the United States is very negative to the idea. I've seen polls that suggest that at least 70 or more percent of the American population polled is opposed to any further, participation in a war in the Middle East, period. It doesn't make any difference. Well, we also went to war over a lie in 1965 in the Gulf of Tonkin. There had been no incident at the time that Congress was told that we'd been attacked. The whole narrative was a lie. We had not been attacked. And no one had been injured or killed. There was no danger to our naval vessels or anything else. Didn't make any difference. The narrative was concocted. It was sold to the Congress. It was proliferated in the newspapers. And everybody believed it. One officer at the time, a Navy officer in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a staff officer, called the Senate at the Senate Armed Services Committee and spoke to a staffer and said, look, this is a big lie. There's been no battle. No one has been killed. No one has been injured. There's no reason for this. And he was thanked for his interest, and they hung up the phone. I'm afraid we're in a position right now where the truth may not matter very much, because right now the Congress and the president are largely aligned with Israel. And if Israel wants to attack, Israel will attack, and we will support it, and we will help defend it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Colonel. Let's go on to another thing I wanted to ask you. It's about something disturbing that's been circulating on X in two separate viral incidents. I just ran into them over the last 24 hours. One in Miami, the other one in Texas. Detectives were filmed showing up at U.S. citizens' homes over the social media posts, trying to question them and asking, were you the one who posted this? In both cases, the common denominator seems to be that the posts were being framed as anti-Semitic. So these occurrences are eerily reminiscent of what we've seen unfolding in the UK in the last 2 years, where just in 2023, it's now 3 years, police made in 2023 over 12,000 arrests linked to online posts, with about 1,100 of them resulting in convictions. And currently, as we speak, there are around 4,000 British citizens awaiting similar trials, a level of enforcement that has alarmed free speech advocates. So your comments are on the exercise of the First Amendment in the United States and whether its safeguarding is endangered now.
Well, it very much is at risk. What we have in the United States is something we haven't seen since the Bolsheviks took power in Russia. And that is that the American government has effectively declared Jews collectively as a protected class of citizens. We've never had that. We've never had any protective class whatsoever. The closest we ever came to that was affirmative action, and that was designed, obviously, to be temporary, but then it became permanent. And it was designed to advance the interests of people that were black because of the history of slavery. Well, that is no longer valid, although it's practiced in many places. That's been overturned by the Supreme Court. I think what you have today that's different is that the president has appointed a czar, a so-called czar in the State Department, whose mission is to identify and fight anti-Semitism, not just in the United States, but around the world. So this particular man is a rabbi, and he's talking about going to Indonesia and demanding that textbooks in Indonesia be revised and changed to suit Jewish interests, to mirror whatever Jewish history is according to the Jews. This is backed by the president. There are people all over the country right now, various governors who have signed executive orders about the same subject. And so this business of anti-Semitism is a very tricky one, because what is the definition of anti-Semitism? As one Jewish friend of mine said, well, it's whatever the Jews say it is. That's not a good way to do business, and that's the way it looks right now. There are lots of Jews in the United States who are not comfortable with this. This is not a universally supported idea by Jews, but it's real, and it violates free speech. There's no question about it. The whole problem with hate speech of any kind is, where do you draw a line? When does it become dangerous? When is it hurtful beyond feelings? When does it lead to real violence? This is a much more specific, focused effort to suppress anyone who is critical of Israel. And if you are critical of Israel in any way, you are by definition an anti-Semite. That's where we are effectively. Yeah, I think that's catastrophic. But that's it. Now, will this last? Can this last? I don't know. I know that the people in Great Britain are very uncomfortable with what's happening in their country. There's a man named David Betts, a professor in London, who's written extensively on the potential for civil war in Great Britain. You might think about interviewing him and ask him what he thinks the potential for that is in Great Britain, and that's something that is worth exploring. The British are very unhappy with what they see as the Islamicization of London. There are people openly declaring that London is no longer a British city. It's not the only one. There are a lot of problems right now. And when you pick a certain group of people and say they're protected, they're special, they get to do this and you don't, you're in trouble. You've got a real problem. I think that's happening. Fortunately, it's not everywhere, but it goes on. And as you point out, I'm familiar with a case in Miami, and it was handled intelligently by the people who were being accused. Now we'll see what develops from it. I think they're going to have a hard time making this work in the courts. But then again, it depends on the judges. And the last administration appointed large numbers of judges who were very, very far to the left. How they interpret the law is anybody's guess. But yeah, it's a problem. Free speech is at risk. There's no question about it. And as you know, most of us assume if someone's out there suppressing your speech, you must be telling the truth.
Exactly.
Because if you weren't telling the truth, nobody would give a damn, right?
Yeah, of course.
But this is across the West, as you point out. It's everywhere in the West.
We are so close to 10,000 subscribers, so I need you to do something. It takes 2 seconds. Hit subscribe on YouTube and tap the bell. That's the best way to support Unfiltered with Sam, which is the only English language woman-led geopolitical platform broadcasting from the Eastern Mediterranean. So subscribe, share, and help this voice reach further. Colonel, let's shift over to Greenland now. As we speak, Davos 2026.
Aren't we going to talk about Cyprus and Greece and vertical integration and the quadrangular meeting and so forth. I thought you were going to talk about that.
I wanted to talk about those things when I contacted Carol last week. That's what I wrote her. But then I don't know, your president and all his posts about Greenland and
before we leave the Middle East, I think it's worth pointing out that this vertical integration, which is designed to essentially make Cyprus, Greece, ultimately Bulgaria, all the way up to Romania.
You're talking about the vertical corridor, sir, yes? So
right.
Just to give context to the viewers.
Right, the vertical corridor. This is designed to wean everybody off Russian oil and gas. It's inherently anti-Russian, which is unfortunate because the majority of Greeks, I don't know how the people on Cyprus feel, but the majority of Greeks have historically been pro-Russian. The same thing is true in Bulgaria to a large extent. The Romanians, it may be mixed. Moldova, it may be mixed. I don't know. But the point is, you can't view that in isolation from everything else happening in Syria, Iran, Lebanon, Israel. It's all linked, and it's all part of a larger U.S. strategy. But that U.S. strategy is also inseparable from Israeli dominance and hegemony in the region, because Israel wants to be the hub for the movement of oil and gas and so forth into Europe. It would like to replace everyone else. In other words, nothing gets anywhere or goes anywhere unless it moves through Israel. I think these are all dangerous policies, which with questionable outcomes. But that's clearly the strategy. There's no doubt about it. And that's why I think it should be mentioned, because you can't view that separately from everything else we're talking about in the Middle East.
The new appointment of a U.S. ambassador to Greece, Kimberly Guilfoyle, it is her, well, I don't know how to name it correctly, like her focus, the vertical corridor. It's now this. She's strongly advocating for it.
Yeah, she's arguing it's designed to strengthen cooperation, as I understand it, to combat terrorism, protect critical infrastructure, enhance maritime security, blah, 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 with plans for cybersecurity. And the Great Sea Interconnector project underway for electricity cables and so forth, so on.
Yeah.
That sounds great, but it's very anti-Russian and Israel-centric. Let's be frank.
It is Israel-centric. It is anti-Russian, but it's also anti-Turkish, sir.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
The Turks are in a different position. They could seize one or two islands in the Aegean. Right now, in fact, I can't remember the name of it. There's one island in particular that's only 10 miles or so from Turkey that is still controlled by Greece. It's worth considering right now that in view of our readiness, ostensibly, to seize Greenland, it would not surprise me if the Turks took the opportunity to seize those islands. That would be a strategic game changer in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yes,
there's not a great deal that the Greeks could do about it.
There's a lot of things underway because Turkey has its own strategic corridors in mind and energy routes in mind. And then you have the other routes underway that are Israel-centric, as you mentioned. I mean, over the last month, since we're going this direction, over the last month, we've seen 3 high-level Cyprus, Greece, Israel meetings, one in Nicosia with the heads of the naval and air forces of the 3 countries, the other one in Jerusalem right before Christmas, a couple of days before Christmas, between Prime Minister of Greece, President of Cyprus, Christodoulidis, and Bibi Netanyahu, and then again in Nicosia a few days later, where military deals were signed between the 3 countries. These military deals involved, oh God, I'm not very good in the specifics, but it involved officially to protect the routes that are gonna go forward. You mentioned the Great Sea Interconnector, which is the electric cable connection between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and then further up. Then there's the vertical corridor again, which is the supply of natural gas from the oil fields of Israel, Cyprus, Greece, then through Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, and from there they have the pipelines that already supply the rest of Europe that have been cut off, that were supplying the Russian gas. And then we also had the other big project that's underway, which coincided with Prime Minister of India Modi's visit to Cyprus a few weeks before the high-level talks in Jerusalem between Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. Prime Minister Modi visited Cyprus, and then followed that visit with visiting countries in the Gulf and Egypt. And that was to promote the IMEC corridor, India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which is a whole, you can say more about that, sir, because that is a huge project that involves all those countries. And it's not just about the transfer of energy, it's the trade and goods and services, rail lines, everything. And these are all Israel-centric. These are all anti-Turkey, as you say, and Turkey is not liking all these projects.
Well, the other issue here, though, is that it is also anti-Russian, which is not necessarily a good thing in my judgment. But there is a great hostility to Russia, unfortunately, on the Israeli right in the United States. So they're happily doing everything they can to undermine, obstruct, or halt Russian influence. The problem that I always have when I talk to the Greeks about this thing is that everybody needs to understand something, and I don't think most people do. Americans do not live in the Eastern Mediterranean. We don't live in the Middle East. We don't live in the Balkans. We don't live in Europe. We live in North America. So a lot of people are quite willing to make themselves dependent upon American military power on the assumption that whatever happens, this global reach that America appears to have is going to show up and change everything and protect everybody. And I think that's a dangerous assumption in the world we live in now, because the world has changed. This is very much a multipolar world. The Cold War is over, even though we decided to maintain hostility to Russia and to a large extent China. The truth is these countries are increasingly peers. In other words, they are other great powers. We are not the only great power. And as a result, I encourage smaller nations to think in terms of cooperating and working with their neighbors instead of fighting with them. Because you may not see the American military show up when you think it ought to be there because it may be engaged elsewhere, or we may no longer be engaged at all. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I don't think they're relying so much on America engaging in a standoff with Turkey. They're relying, Greece and Cyprus, on a collective cooperation with the Israelis, because Netanyahu did mention publicly in the statements in the December meeting in Jerusalem with the Cypriot president and the Greek prime minister that regional powers should, I don't remember verbatim how he said it, but he said should let go of their the return of their imperial dreams. That's not going to happen, he said. So Israel seems that it's ready to protect its interests in the area, because we're talking about changing regional and global dynamics in a major way in the region that sets Israel as the regional powerhouse. They're not going to let that go.
Well, you've got to keep in mind that Israel's power really rests on an American foundation. If that should change, Israel is no longer the great power that it appears to be. Again, this goes back to our discussion of what's Mr. Netanyahu going to do? Well, he's more likely to act now than later, because he realizes privately he may not have the kind of support in the future, a year from now, that he has today. My point is that everybody in the region needs to be a little more flexible in their view of the world. Tightening alliances sounds like a great way to secure yourself. But increasingly, we live in a world of limited liability partners. Someone who was your opponent yesterday could well be an ally tomorrow. Not permanently, but selectively on a case-by-case basis. These alliances that were formed in the early part of the 20th century were catastrophic. They led to major wars that might have otherwise been avoided because the members of the alliances automatically pulled the trigger and went to war. That's the worst thing that could happen right now. And I also fear that nuclear weapons, despite our best efforts to suppress those and keep them under control, are likely to proliferate. So you put all of these things together, and I go back to what I was saying earlier. Everyone needs to define their interests carefully and make sure that they have not committed their interests in national security, in survival 100%, or vested it 100% in any other country. In other words, to the extent that you can be independent and self-reliant, you should do so.
Yeah, that's clear, sir. It's hard to do, though, when Israeli interests have taken a stronghold within.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Cyprus.
I understand that completely.
It was very easy for that to happen, being we're a small country, and it's also happening in Greece. So I understand what you're saying, sir. It's very hard for it.
Yeah, somebody said to me recently, it looks like the Kingdom of Jerusalem in reverse. In other words, you're getting the Kingdom of Jerusalem, only this time they're not Christians. It's an interesting concept. I had not thought of it in those terms, but Cyprus certainly understands that. And I think you can make that argument. It's now the kingdom of a Jewish state, not a Christian one. So anyhow, it's something that everybody in the region needs to think about. I worry about the automatic tripwire. You were talking earlier. What do you think will trigger this with Iran? I worry about the automatic tripwire that brings people into conflict that they would otherwise choose to avoid. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
So now you want to go back to Greenland.
Yes, let's go back to Greenland, because I know Americans and the Westerners are more interested in that matter than our matters here. So, but thank you, sir, for devoting your time discussing.
Well, I would much rather go to Cyprus than to Greenland. Greenland is not a target destination I would ever want to go to.
George is laughing.
I've been close to it. Yeah, I mean, I've been close to it. I've been to northern Norway. I've been to Newfoundland. I don't need to go to Greenland. Just keep this in mind. Since World War II, we have controlled everything militarily, from Alaska across Canada to Greenland and all the way up to Norway. We're already in control. We already have a base there.
Yeah.
There's nothing to prevent us from doing militarily whatever we think we need to do in our interest.
So it's the
So the notion that we have to own Greenland is absurd. And then the second thing is the Danes have been good allies. We're friends with the Danes.
Yeah.
The Danes signed a treaty with us. They've been very supportive. If we want to extract resources from that place in the future, we can do it. We can do it jointly with the Danes and others. But keep something in mind. There is no worse place on planet Earth than the Arctic to drill for resources, regardless of what you're looking for. Very expensive. So that's not the driving force here.
So since America could get what it wanted on Greenland without all this unfolding could have happened in the background, then why is all this unfolding? Even if it's not for the resources, and it already has. Why is it unfolding in the way it's unfolding? Why is Trump making it so public and creating all these?
There are a lot of people. There are a lot of people asking that question, and unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you. President Trump seems to be the driving force here. He's taken the initiative. He seems to think it has to be tightly in our grip. You know, for instance, if you go back to this business of rare earths, which are very, very important now, and they've always been. It's just that it's like everything else. Nobody notices that you got a problem with electricity until the lights go out. Well, that's the way we operate here in the United States. Oh, now we need rare earths. Where do we get them? Well, we don't want to go to China. China's a problem. Well, it's not so much mining rare earths. You can do that in Canada, in the United States, many other countries. Norway has the largest concentration in Europe. It's been found right offshore in about 250 feet of water. It can be extracted easily. We could go work with the Norwegians on that. It's refining. North America, the United States, has not built a major refinery to deal with rare earths and other ores. It costs about $1.2 billion to build. We need to build it. That would change everything. Right now, we're hostage to Chinese bureaucrats who decide when they're going to refine our ore or when they won't. So whenever we build an F-16, whenever we build a cell phone or something, we're doing it with the permission of China. This can't last.
Okay.
So, frankly, I would much prefer that instead of spending $1.5 billion to build a naval base on the Pacific coast of Peru, which is something people want to do right now in Washington, we don't need it. There's no threat to the Peruvian coast there. Just because the Chinese are doing business in Peru doesn't create a national emergency. Take that money, build a refinery. That's what we desperately need to do. But, right now, I'm a minority. But hopefully more and more people will become interested in that. But as far as Greenland goes, I don't see the need, and I don't understand it. Yeah. Frankly speaking, you can make a similar argument about Venezuela. We spent a lot of money to get into Venezuela and take the President Maduro and his wife. Now we're talking about the Venezuelan government, which we decried as communist and anti-democratic and so forth and so on. Now we're saying, well, I guess we can work with that government. I think Venezuela is going to drop off the agenda here over the next several months. That's another problem. The oil there is wonderful, but it's very, very deep. It's very heavy with sulfur. Takes extreme refining. We can do it in Texas. But, to go in there and drill and pull anything out substantial costs billions of dollars. And the oil corporations have made it very clear to the president, this is not a financially rewarding exercise. This is not a good place for us to invest. There are other places we can go. He doesn't like that. But in the end, I think that's what's going to happen. We're not going to invade Venezuela, replace its government, and govern the country. We would be insane to do so. So I think that'll sort of drift away. Maybe Greenland is the new distraction to divert our attention from Venezuela to Greenland. I don't know. It's hard to tell how these people think. But strategically, we don't need to commit to the invasion and conquest of Greenland. You can get the rare earths more cheaply from nicer climates.
To extract.
And as I said, extract them more cheaply elsewhere. Okay. I mean, eventually you can get around to Greenland. There's no question about it. But if you're going to drill for oil or natural gas or any of the rare earth elements, copper is terribly important to us right now. Silver is very important. We have huge quantities of silver right on our doorstep in Mexico. I'm hoping that no one decides to invade Mexico for the silver mines. I'd much rather just buy the silver from Mexico. Do you understand? Everything is out there. We can do business with the world. The world will do business with us. But we got to get out of this unfortunate habit of brutalizing and bullying other countries.
Yeah. This whole Greenland debacle, though, is unfolding in manners that, threaten economically both the EU and the US, because the EU is now reportedly weighing retaliation and enforcing its so-called bazooka trade doctrine, which I don't know if it's ever enforced it before. It's a fast-acting EU retaliation tool, allowing Europe to respond reciprocally with tariffs and restrictions and market access limits if it feels it's being economically pressured, which is the case. So, I mean, where do you think the standoff with the EU is heading? Does it actually have the leverage to change Trump's calculus, and are Americans prepared for an economic geopolitical blowback if Europe hits back?
Well, remember that we have been trying to push the Europeans into a hostile posture toward China as well as Russia. The Europeans can change that overnight. Okay. We are right now a great power that has dominated the world for 80 years. The financial system that you are part of and I am part of is a system that was created in the aftermath of the Second World War. It's been through a series of changes and evolution, and that financial system is no longer attractive to much of the rest of the world because they've learned that if you give your money to the American financial system, you put it in an American bank, you have no guarantee that you'll ever get it back. All they have to do for evidence is look at what's happened to the $300 billion that the Russians deposited. And that money is sitting in Brussels. And everyone is trying to get at it and steal it from Russia. And we, unfortunately, are part of that. We've destroyed the faith and confidence of tens of millions of people all over the world in our system, in our way of doing business. It's a disaster. But I think what's going to happen as a result is you're going to see a split in the world. One side of the world will stay largely with our system and probably with the fiat currency, and some of it will be backed by commodities, and perhaps some of it will be backed by other means. I mean, we may have digital currency and so forth. I don't know. But then the rest of the world, and that's going to be a large portion of it, more than half, I suspect, will operate in a world where the currency is backed by gold.
Gold will come back, huh?
That's already begun. You now have the Chinese that have opened a gold vault in Riyadh, as well as in Hong Kong, and the yuan is being used to trade in oil. So the petrodollar is being replaced by the yuan in the Persian Gulf. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for it, because it's backed by gold.
Gold, yes. Yes, sir.
So the world is changing. We don't like that. NATO is going to go out of business. We don't need it. The Europeans need to be independent again. They need to be responsible for themselves. They need to be their own first responders in conflict. I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. The world needs to move on to this new multipolar environment. And I think we need to come to terms with something else. Military power is nice. Everybody wants it in some degree. But it's not the answer to solving our problems. We need to solve the problems that we have with other ways and other means. And if we can't solve them, we should have the good sense to walk away. And that I include in that category Greenland, because we've tried to buy it several times, and each time the Danes had said no.
No.
Well, then, no. But at the same time, we have a treaty that allows us to do anything we want.
Yeah, make business with
So where's the problem?
Yeah. Where's the logic gone? I don't know where's it gone, Colonel, really. They're creating all this unnecessary stress all over the world. I mean, on people personally. There are 57,000 now Greenlanders. I don't know if you've seen them when they make comments on TV. Everyone's descended. There are all these international channels. And they're saying we've lost sleep. We're stressed. There's these older ladies who say, I see Trump in my sleep. I see him coming in my... I feel so sorry for them. But all this... It's just business. Why don't they just do business? It's creating unnecessary stress to people on a personal level. And it's also, screwing the markets everywhere and the sense of security around the globe. There's no logic left.
Well, there are a lot of people in Washington, and I think also in Jerusalem, who see lots of threats everywhere, whether or not they're real. That's part of the problem.
They've forgotten to... believe in the goodness of people, in the goodness of the people that you converse with and the people that you want to do business with. You don't need to be going to war with everyone and threatening everyone.
No, I think that's the bottom line. I think that needs to be understood, and right now it's not. And Americans are like anybody else. They tend to believe what the government says. At some point, they may suddenly no longer believe in it. There's a lot of evidence that that's beginning to take hold, that there are a lot of people who are losing faith in the government and its institutions. And there are good reasons for that. We've been through an awful lot over the last 80 years, and Vietnam had a terrible impact on us, and most of us thought that experience in Vietnam would inoculate us against any future stupidity. It did not. We're back where we started.
Yes, sir.
Involving ourselves in places we don't need to be. Imagining enemies that don't really threaten us, and certainly from our standpoint hardly exist at all.
Colonel, I wanted us to finish off by touching upon Gaza, because it's come up again in the forefront. The Gaza peace plan now entering phase B, as Trump and Bibi call it. We have President Macron, who has just signaled that he doesn't want France to join the so-called Board of Peace. He doesn't want France to join Trump's so-called Board of Peace. And Trump immediately told reporters when he was slapped with this comment of Macron, right off the bat, as he heard it, standing on the tarmac there, talking to reporters, that, okay, I'm going to consider slapping 200% tariffs on French wine and champagne, And in Europe, the mere mention of the word consider by Trump is being now taken as a given with Trump, you know? And so we had Euronews yesterday, which is like the CNN of Europe. It even ran it as a top story. You saw, you know, French winemakers already sounding the alarm. What's your take on what this tells us about how Trump is building this coalition when it comes to this board of peace? Is it essentially invite only, and does participation come with a required monetary commitment from each country, meaning that this isn't just a political club, but a pay to enter structure tied to funding this plan?
Well, two quick observations. Gaza is never mentioned in the charter for this board of peace.
Oh.
It's not even mentioned. If you read through what they're saying the board of peace is supposed to do, Gaza is not mentioned in there. And most of us thought the board of peace would be designed to deal exclusively with Gaza. So it's clearly not exclusively Gaza, if it's Gaza at all. It looks more like something which people in the 19th century, certainly before the First World War, called the Concert of Europe. The Concert of Europe consisted of Tsarist Russia, the Empire of Austria and the Kingdom of Hungary, the Imperial Germany, the British Empire, France, Italy, Spain. Now, this was the Concert of Europe. They were the decisive actors. They were the ones who would periodically meet and decide what would or wouldn't happen, who got what and who traded what, and so forth. I think that President Trump would like to move in that direction. Most American presidents and leaders have never cared for the United Nations, because in the United Nations, some very small country like Sri Lanka has a vote along with the United States. And presidents say, why in the hell am I being obstructed by Sri Lanka? Who is Sri Lanka to obstruct me? And so you have this predisposition to evade the UN, to stay out of it as much as possible, talk about it, pay lip service to it, genuflect to it as needed. But in reality, it's a lot of trouble. It's an irritant. You'd rather sit down with the other big boys at the table and make decisions. So I think that's really what's behind all of this. It's not working very well. Now, the president of Hungary, Orban, who very much wants good relations with the United States, has said he'll pay the fee, the $1 billion that you have to pay to be in it, and he'll join the Board of Peace. Erdogan is trying to straddle the fence. He wants to have good relations with Moscow, as well as with Washington, and also Jerusalem, and Ankara. So he's doing what he needs to do for Hungary. Hungary is a small country, used to be a large kingdom. It now consists of 7 or 8 million people at most. But most others are not seeing it in those terms. In other words, they're not willing to pay the $1 billion to sit at the table. They don't see that the investment is worthwhile. They think that they'll be ignored anyway. And I think that's the case with Mr. Macron. The other thing is people grow tired of being insulted and offended by President Trump. And he does that sometimes without even thinking, without even realizing it. So we're not going to see too many more Orbans show up. They're unique, and Orban is unique. The rest of them are probably going to say, the hell with this. It's more trouble than it's worth. I'm not going to be part of it. Now, I suppose when push comes to shove, the British, as always, will saddle up with us. The English-speaking countries tend to do that. But beyond that, I don't know. I think Canada has said no, along with France, and there may be others. The more who say no, the more unlikely this is to ever come into existence and mean anything.
So
we have a bad habit in the United States. We get an idea, and we think, oh, this is a great idea. Let's go do it, without sitting there and saying, no, wait a minute. Are we sure this is a good idea? Who else is going to support it? Who else will be against it? Who can afford it? Who cannot? I don't think those questions were addressed. That we do this in military operations. You know, it was like Hitler was told by his generals in 1940 after the French campaign. He talked about going into Russia. And he was told privately by the senior generals, you realize in Russia there are no roads. There are no gas stations. In France, when we ran out of fuel, if we had to, we could pull into a French gas station and we could replenish the fuel. You can't do that in Russia. And he didn't listen. He didn't understand the logistical nightmare of moving over 1,000 miles, millions of troops and equipment. That, more than anything else, defeats every army that goes into Russia. It's too far, it's too difficult, and it's too cold. So we're in the same boat. We're not thinking things through. We're taking shots. That's a great idea. Boom. Let's shoot that one over there. Oh, there's another target. That's a great idea. And we shoot it. The outcome is chaos. And chaos is something business hates. If you're in business, you want stability. You want certainty. You want stability in supply and resources. You want stability in prices. We're doing the opposite. We're creating chaos everywhere.
So with this boat of peace, we come to an end of our chat today, sir. This boat of peace that seems to be an attempt, as you say, to build a parallel crisis management structure that sidelines the UN. So we have now NATO and the UN trying to be sidelined by Trump, their credibility and their function. I want to thank you, Colonel, for your insight, for breaking all of this down so clearly for our viewers. And to the viewers, I want to thank you all for watching. I need your help with one thing. 1 year in broadcasting from the Eastern Mediterranean, I never expected to be this close to 10,000 subscribers, and the fact that most of you are American is incredibly encouraging. It's powerful. It's powerful to see Americans actively seeking alternatives to mainstream Western narratives. And I've always had a soft spot for the US. I still fondly reminisce about my years studying there. So help me cross the 10,000 subscriber mark together. It only takes 2 seconds. Hit subscribe and tap the bell. And please like, comment, and share. Send this to friends and family who want the real story behind the headlines. It's the best way to support my work. Colonel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure, happy to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Always a pleasure, sir. Always. This is the only English language woman-led geopolitical platform broadcasting from the Eastern Mediterranean. So subscribe, share, and help this voice reach further.